In the Star Tower within the City Lord's mansion of Huyang City in the origin world of the Origin Continent, Luo Feng had spent a long time using the Wisdom Book and the Eye of Life and Death to study high-level primordial bloodlines after completely mastering all low-level primordial bloodlines. He had currently researched about 70% of the high-level bloodlines. At that moment, he sensed an invisible fluctuation, and a weapon materialized before him. Like treasures exchanged through infinite space reward points, it appeared through direct summoning. The weapon was a completely black saber whose immense power was entirely concentrated within its blade. Simply looking at it gave Luo Feng the same overwhelming feeling as the Star Tower blood scale, and its aura even reminded him of the origin of the source world. He carefully grasped the handle, finding no resistance, and immediately realized that although he was still merely a life trapped inside the braided cage, if he swung this saber, even high-level primordial lives would likely be annihilated instantly. The saber possessed the highest level of destructive power and was a treasured weapon desired by world-level primordial experts. Because the cultivator camp possessed only a limited number of world-level primordial lives, Senior Yuan and the others had decided during this critical war to open these treasures for exchange by talented cultivators. If a cultivator died, the treasures would be reclaimed. Luo Feng recognized that unlike the Star Tower blood scale, which was only a single scale incapable of displaying its full strength, this sky-splitting saber had naturally been born within the infinite primordial space and inherently possessed terrifying destructive power. Holding it felt like a tiny mouse touching the controls of a nuclear weapon, capable of destroying heaven and earth with a single swing, possibly plunging the source world into catastrophe. He understood he was still too weak to use it before escaping the braided cage and had obtained it solely for cultivation by comparing it with the Star Tower blood scale. Opening the Eye of Life and Death on his forehead, Luo Feng first examined the saber's internal structure without using the Wisdom Book. Inside was an endless web of secret patterns consisting of only two categories. Around 89% represented destruction, while around 11% represented life. Unlike primordial bloodlines or the Star Tower blood scale, which contained many different kinds of secret patterns, this weapon contained only these two pure categories. Luo Feng was delighted because the saber perfectly matched his goal of studying destruction supported by life. While observing it, he refined the saber with his own power. Since Senior Yuan and the others had already prepared it, the refinement required only half a day. After succeeding, destructive aura surged from both the saber and Luo Feng himself until the person and weapon seemed to become one. Luo Feng realized that rather than perfectly controlling the saber, his lower realm allowed the saber to influence him instead. While holding it, his consciousness sensed an incredibly distant location, much farther away than even the dark sacred realm was from the origin world. Across all his avatars, he could only perceive that the location was unimaginably distant. There he faintly sensed endless destructive aura along with countless weapons of every imaginable form, each possessing power comparable to the sky-splitting saber. Compared with that place, the destructive power within the saber itself was insignificant. Luo Feng instinctively understood that the sky-splitting saber had originated there and still retained a connection to its birthplace. He resolved that after escaping the braided cage and becoming strong enough, he would one day visit that mysterious location. Setting those thoughts aside, he resumed using the Wisdom Book to study the saber. Since he was its owner, the saber offered no resistance, allowing the Wisdom Book to reveal countless secrets. Luo Feng discovered an entirely new path for fusing life and destruction. Previously, the Star Tower blood scale had demonstrated a path where life served as the foundation and destruction as support, allowing immense destructive strength through overwhelming vitality. His own life and death Tao followed this direction. However, the sky-splitting saber revealed the opposite path, using destruction as the core with life serving as assistance. Every strand of life could trigger destructive power that multiplied billions of times, with each wave of destruction creating endless chain reactions capable of annihilating everything. Luo Feng considered this approach extremely dangerous, believing such ultimate destruction could even destroy itself. He understood this was the Tao carried by weapons rather than primordial lives. Since living beings must first preserve their own existence and therefore inevitably possess life secret patterns and other Taos instead of pursuing pure destruction, he concluded that his own path remained correct by placing life at its core while incorporating selected mysteries of destruction to perfect the life and death Tao. A completely new world of cultivation opened before him, and he immersed himself in comprehending it. Meanwhile, inside the great primordial hall of the dark sacred realm, the two high-level primordial lives, Chu Zhe and Yifei, continued observing Luo Feng. They noted that although they themselves had received abundant cultivation resources during their walker stages, support greatly diminished after becoming high-level primordial lives, leaving even Yifei unqualified to exchange for the skysplitting saber. Chu Zhe explained that all opportunities intended for them had already been granted and that because they had become high-level primordial lives through ultimate bloodline awakening, the lords would not continue investing heavily in them. Such high-level primordial lives were merely insignificant soldiers during camp wars. Only those who advanced by comprehending bloodline mysteries directly continued receiving meaningful support, while individuals like themselves had almost no chance of becoming world-level primordial lives. Chu Zhe believed Luo Feng possessed vastly greater potential as a fusion Dao cultivator whose displayed strength already exceeded many other fusion Dao experts. Yifei recalled that the Lord had explained Luo Feng was pursuing an extreme path by maximizing life instead of balancing life and destruction, greatly increasing the difficulty of their fusion but producing much greater strength if successful. Chu Zhe remarked that Luo Feng was already stepping beyond the dark sacred realm and that if they did not assist him now, they would no longer have the qualification to help him after he escaped the braided cage. Since fusion Dao cultivators with extraordinary talent had the greatest chance of becoming world-level primordial lives, Luo Feng might later support them and place them under his command. They decided to help him by selecting an appropriate imprisoned primordial opponent, believing such assistance would create sufficient karmic connection and perhaps allow Luo Feng to achieve his breakthrough. They traveled deep into the time-space prison where more than 30,000 imprisoned high-level primordial lives were confined. Chu Zhe announced that they would select one prisoner to be temporarily released into the wilderness of the dark sacred realm. Although presented as freedom, all the prisoners understood this actually meant exile and certain death because their strength would be sealed before being hunted down by weaker walkers. One enormous black mist life immediately offered to surrender and join the cultivator camp by allowing its life core to be refined. Chu Zhe and Yifei mocked the proposal, explaining that only during the Lord's large-scale recruitment could innate high-level primordial lives submit through life core refinement, and that opportunity had already passed. Chu Zhe explained that only the Lords possessed the ability to refine life cores, making later submission impossible. Yifei then selected the largest and strongest prisoner, an enormous fiery red rock life. Chu Zhe further increased its restraints using the prison command token, rapidly suppressing its power until it fell below the high-level primordial standard and continued weakening until its aura only slightly exceeded that of Divine Emperor GK. The remaining prisoners watched with mixed emotions, fully aware that exile meant death. The fiery red rock prisoner declared that although it would die, the cultivator camp would ultimately be destroyed, its territories conquered, and only a few lords might survive while everything else became hunting grounds for the primordial camp. Chu Zhe merely sneered, shrank the completely sealed prisoner into his palm, and departed with Yifei, leaving the remaining prisoners to accept that their fates were entirely controlled by others. In a wilderness of the dark sacred realm, space fluctuated and a giant of fiery red rock appeared. It looked around with a fierce gaze, realizing that it had been exiled, filled with endless rage and unwillingness. It could not accept that, as a high-level primordial life, it would eventually be besieged and dismembered by the weak cultivators trapped inside the braided cage. It even wished to commit suicide, but after becoming a prisoner, even death was impossible. It had become war spoils for the cultivator camp, destined to be used as a cultivation resource. Cultivators would study its body materials and bloodline mysteries, refine artifacts, create auxiliary treasures, and utilize every part of its body with maximum efficiency. Enraged, it roared at the cultivators. The fiery red glow covering its body became even brighter. Its rocky surface melted, and its aura surged. However, the suppression immediately activated. Illusory chains penetrated its body, connecting it to the void and suppressing it with infinite earthly force. Filled with hatred, it cursed the cultivators, swearing that all their territories would one day be destroyed, leaving only a few lords alive while every other cultivator became food for primordial life. Unable to vent its fury, it wandered through the wilderness step by step, enduring endless suppressive force with every movement while constantly cursing the despicable race and searching for an outlet for its murderous intent. After a long time had passed, a hunting team of cultivators discovered the endless fiery power from afar. Inside a flying boat were 7 cultivators, all at the half-primordial enlightened level. Using investigation secret techniques, they observed the molten prisoner, whose body was covered in flowing lava and blazing flames, radiating an overwhelmingly fierce aura. They immediately recognized it as a primordial prisoner. Although its power was completely suppressed, its aura still far surpassed that of ordinary cultivators because it possessed the essence of a high-level primordial life. The cultivators knew that primordial prisoners had their power sealed and moved relatively slowly, making them suitable targets for coordinated sieges. Remaining cautious and keeping their distance, they formed formations and launched long-range attacks. Various formation techniques, including void entanglement and annihilation through earthly power, struck the molten prisoner. However, it remained seated without moving, treating every attack as nothing more than an itch. Looking at the cultivators with contempt, it regarded them as insignificant ants. Although all its power was sealed and it had been released specifically as an opponent for Luo Feng, ordinary cultivator teams posed no threat to it. It suddenly stood up, while the suppressive chains covering its body prevented flight and forced it to charge across the ground. Every stride shook the earth as it rushed toward the cultivator team, intending to close the distance and incinerate an entire void with a single strike. Realizing they could not injure it at all, the cultivators immediately retreated. Experienced in dealing with primordial prisoners, they knew some weaker prisoners could be wounded or even killed by dozens of pinnacle existences working together. But this molten prisoner was obviously far stronger. They decided stronger cultivators had to be summoned and that the information should also be reported to Luo Feng Divine Emperor. The flying boat escaped rapidly while the molten prisoner, unable to fly, could only stop and watch them with resentment. Only one day later, tens of thousands of half-primordial enlightened cultivators, more than 100 pinnacle existences, Divine Emperor GK, and Dragon 9 Taoist Monarch gathered to confront the molten prisoner. Dragon 9 Taoist Monarch, acknowledged as the greatest formation expert in the Dark Sacred Realm, presided over the Super Grand Formation. His powerful spiritual will perfectly controlled the entire formation, harmonizing the strength of every cultivator. The tremendous power of the formation astonished everyone involved and filled them with pride. The formation condensed into a terrifying blade that slashed across the molten prisoner's neck, leaving only shallow marks that quickly disappeared as lava flowed over the wounds. The formation also condensed terrifying lightning bolts that repeatedly struck the prisoner with enough force to frighten every cultivator. Nevertheless, the molten prisoner's body was unbelievably tough because it had been personally selected by Chu Zhe and Yifeiya as one of the largest primordial prisoners. Dragon 9 Taoist Monarch and Divine Emperor GK could hardly believe the result. Even after the combined attacks of more than 10,000 cultivators, the prisoner suffered only insignificant injuries that healed instantly. None of them had ever encountered such an overwhelmingly powerful primordial prisoner in the Dark Sacred Realm. The two leaders understood that the prisoner had been deliberately released by a cultivator who had escaped the braided cage. But this particular prisoner was exceptionally powerful. The fact that tens of thousands of cultivators working together still could not deal with it seemed absurd. Dragon 9 Taoist Monarch privately concluded that the prisoner had most likely been released specifically because of Luo Feng Divine Emperor. Divine Emperor GK remarked that Dragon 9 Taoist Monarch's formation was unrivaled in the Dark Sacred Realm and that such a formation should already be capable of matching Luo Feng Divine Emperor. Dragon 9 Taoist Monarch was puzzled because he believed his spiritual will had already transcended the braided cage. So commanding a grand formation of more than 10,000 cultivators should have been no different from Luo Feng. He asked why Luo Feng had not arrived, and Divine Emperor GK explained that Luo Feng had entered secluded cultivation, had cut off all communication, and allowed no disturbances. Dragon 9 Taoist Monarch realized that the primordial prisoner would continue causing destruction for some time. More than 10,000 cultivators maintained a grand formation while observing the lava prisoner from afar. The prisoner mocked them, calling them weak and despicable because they still could not defeat it despite its strength being heavily sealed. Although the cultivators felt humiliated, they admitted that even their combined strength could not seriously injure it. Inside the large-scale primordial hall, The high-level primordial life forms Chu Zhe and Yifei watched the confrontation. Chu Zhe was dissatisfied because they had specifically chosen this opponent for Luo Feng. Yet he had gone into seclusion. Yifei explained that Luo Feng had just obtained the skysplitting saber and naturally needed time to study it. She believed his secluded cultivation would not last long, and both decided to wait patiently. Knowing Luo Feng's rapid growth throughout his cultivation journey, they expected his retreat to be relatively brief. Luo Feng devoted himself entirely to studying the highest-level destructive mysteries contained within the skysplitting saber. He became completely absorbed in its profound mysteries, and this state of cultivation lasted for more than 100 epochs. During his cultivation, Luo Feng realized that his half-primordial life and death Tao lacked only a tiny spiritual inspiration before reaching perfection. He believed the profound destructive mysteries of the sky-splitting saber could serve as valuable nourishment for developing the primordial life and death Tao. He understood that the half-primordial life and death Tao was vastly inferior to the true primordial life and death Tao. To fully comprehend the primordial life and death Tao, he would need to integrate countless profound mysteries into it, including the Star Tower blood scale and the sky-splitting saber mysteries, which represented only part of the required foundation. Even combining these two inheritances might still be insufficient to complete the primordial life and death Tao. Luo Feng reflected that breaking laws through pure force remained far beyond his current level. However, since such legends existed, cultivators must have succeeded in the past and become supreme lords through that path. He decided not to think so far ahead and instead focused on finding the final spiritual inspiration needed for his current Tao. He then ended his secluded cultivation. After leaving seclusion, Luo Feng reviewed all the transmissions he had previously ignored. He discovered reports about a newly appeared primordial prisoner in the dark sacred realm that even the grand formation of more than 10,000 cultivators had failed to suppress. Curious and interested, Luo Feng considered the prisoner an ideal opponent, since beneath the braided cage he could rarely find anyone capable of challenging him. He immediately departed from the large-scale primordial hall and headed toward the prisoner's location. Crossing the world with enormous strides, Luo Feng reached the battlefield after only a few hundred steps. From a great distance he could already sense the terrifying aura of the lava prisoner and immediately recognized it as a high-level primordial life form whose strength had been greatly sealed. He also noticed that although the prisoner had existed there for more than 100 epochs, only about 1,000 cultivators remained watching. Previously, at the height of the event, more than 100,000 cultivators had gathered there. However, Dragon 9 Taoist Monarch could command at most slightly more than 10,000 cultivators in a unified formation. Beyond that limit, he could no longer control the formation effectively. As a result, although over 100,000 cultivators had assembled, their strength remained scattered without unified coordination. Together they could only wound the lava prisoner slightly, while its enormous body, extraordinary durability, and powerful regenerative abilities allowed it to recover rapidly. Seeing such a powerful opponent, Luo Feng became excited. High above the battlefield, Chu Zhe and Yifei appeared silently. They had deliberately released this primordial prisoner while waiting for Luo Feng's arrival. Chu Zhe believed Luo Feng had become so powerful that even among fusion Dao cultivators very few could rival him. Beneath the braided cage, no cultivator could provide him with meaningful pressure, so only a heavily suppressed high-level primordial life form could challenge him sufficiently. He hoped this battle would allow Luo Feng's life and death Tao to achieve complete perfection. Yifei also hoped that the cultivator camp would eventually gain another world-level primordial life, since their camp possessed far fewer than the innate primordial life camp. Both carefully observed the coming battle. Luo Feng decided to test the prisoner first. He stretched out his arm, which rapidly expanded into an enormous hand, tearing open a rift in space. The giant hand descended instantly before the lava prisoner with overwhelming force. The lava prisoner, which had been sitting calmly, immediately sensed danger and raised its arm to block the incoming attack. Luo Feng unleashed the strike using his massive body, supported by an energy reserve multiplied by 1.2 billion and empowered through the secret treasure Undying Heart. The tremendous impact shattered the prisoner's defense, smashed through its blocking arm, struck directly into its chest, and left a massive depression there. A deep, thunderous sound echoed across the world. The enormous lava prisoner was blasted away and dragged its body across the ground, carving an immense canyon that stretched for billions of kilometers. It finally crashed at the far end of the canyon with its chest cracked open, molten blood flowing from the wounds. The tremendous blow left it completely stunned. Luo Feng felt immense satisfaction after delivering the attack. Since arriving in the dark sacred realm, he had never been able to fight without restraint. Even during his battle against Secret Ruin's Divine Emperor and the other 14 Divine Emperors, he had merely stood still while collapsing spacetime, causing all of his enemies to be brought before him and forced to kneel. Now that his strength had become even greater, he constantly had to restrain himself around ordinary cultivators for fear of accidentally killing them. Facing the lava prisoner at last allowed him to release his full strength freely, making the strike deeply satisfying. Watching from above, Chu Zhe and Yifei concluded that the primordial prisoner's current strength was still insufficient to truly pressure Luo Feng. Yifei immediately urged that part of the prisoner's seal be lifted so its power could be increased by another fold. The lava prisoner lay at the bottom of the massive chasm, staring in disbelief at the black-clothed, black-haired Luo Feng. It could not believe that a cultivator trapped within the braided cage possessed such overwhelming strength. At that moment, it sensed the seal suppressing its body, soul, and life core loosen slightly. Although only a small portion of the seal was released, part of its originally immense power escaped, restoring its strength and completely healing the injury on its chest. The lava prisoner immediately realized that the two guardians of the dark sacred realm had intentionally loosened the seal to use it as a sparring opponent for Luo Feng. It acknowledged Luo Feng's terrifying talent and potential, believing he was worthy of such special treatment. Filled with endless hatred toward the cultivator camp, it decided that if it found an opportunity, it would kill Luo Feng. Since most cultivators within the braided cage did not possess clone techniques, it hoped to deliver a fatal blow and eliminate this extraordinary genius. Although the guardians treated it as a tool, it believed that even a tool could strike back. Chu Zhe and Yifei observed everything from above. Chu Zhe explained that these primordial prisoners originally belonged to the innate primordial life camp and regarded cultivators as mortal enemies. The deeper the prisoner's hatred, the greater the danger Luo Feng would face. Yifei replied that Luo Feng possessed an exceptionally enormous life form, making it extremely difficult to destroy even one of his avatars. Even if an avatar were destroyed, the loss would only strengthen Luo Feng's determination. Their true objective was to use this battle to help Luo Feng achieve another breakthrough. Luo Feng instantly appeared before the lava prisoner and slashed downward with his arm like a divine blade. The power of the half-primordial life and death Dao cut through all resistance and even tore open the membrane separating heaven and earth. Unable to fly and moving slowly because of the seal, the lava prisoner barely managed to shift its body and receive the strike with one shoulder. The tremendous force drove its body deep into the ground, leaving only its upper body exposed. However, it laughed, revealing rows of saw-like teeth. Luo Feng immediately noticed that the prisoner's durability had increased dramatically. Earlier, a single palm strike had sent it flying helplessly, but now it withstood an even stronger attack without suffering any real damage. The lava prisoner mocked Luo Feng, claiming that if it were not sealed, a single finger would be enough to crush him. It then suddenly extended 8 rocky arms and launched a surprise attack. Luo Feng disappeared like an illusion, causing every strike to miss. The lava prisoner realized that the virtual chains suppressing it made all of its movements too slow. Luo Feng immediately unleashed life and death reincarnation. More than 10 images of him appeared around the lava prisoner from every direction, launching an endless chain of palm, fist, claw, and hand techniques. Every attack embodied the half-primordial life and death Dao, with each strike drawing strength from the previous one, creating an endless cycle of life and death. Vitality became increasingly abundant while destructive power continued to accumulate. In the blink of an eye, Luo Feng delivered tens of thousands of attacks. Every strike allowed him to mobilize more of his 12 billion-fold life form. And under such extreme pressure, his control over his colossal body improved further. The lava prisoner could not keep up with Luo Feng's speed and endured all of the impacts. Every blow echoed across heaven and earth. It spat lava like blood, and countless wounds appeared across its body before rapidly healing. It mocked Luo Feng again, saying that after 35,000 strikes, such insignificant injuries had already disappeared. Luo Feng then summoned a cyan gray spear, one of the powerful life and death secret treasures he had acquired after entering the dark sacred realm. After studying the skysplitting saber, he had gained deeper understanding of spear techniques and could unleash greater power through this weapon. He thrust the spear forward as secret patterns illuminated its shaft, generating a force capable of piercing everything. The spear pierced deeply into the lava prisoner's chest. Because of the prisoner's massive body, it only reached halfway through before Luo Feng withdrew it and launched a second thrust. During the second attack, an invisible force inside the lava prisoner's body trapped the spear, and two of its arms seized the shaft, preventing Luo Feng from retrieving it. Luo Feng calmly retreated, abandoned the weapon, and activated the Endless Blood Sea. The Endless Blood Sea expanded across heaven and earth. Hidden within it were two formation diagrams and a black tower. Luo Feng simultaneously activated these three life and death Dao secret treasures. Among all the treasures he possessed, these three worked best with the Endless Blood Sea. Their combined formations created the strongest Blood Sea array he could currently deploy. The sea surged violently, engulfing the enormous lava prisoner while layers of formations continuously restrained it. Under the Blood Sea array, the prisoner's movements became heavily suppressed. Even with all 8 arms, it could only exert roughly 20 to 30% of its available strength. The lava prisoner grew uneasy as it realized Luo Feng's lifeform possessed energy reserves approaching those of certain high-level primordial lives. Although it had once been an elite among high-level primordial beings, its sealed state left it powerless against Luo Feng and his numerous secret treasures. Luo Feng reflected that his life and death Dao emphasized life over destruction, making his close combat explosive power somewhat lacking. By combining secret treasures with formations and maximizing the advantages of his vast life form, he had achieved his strongest current combat state. The lava prisoner had appeared in the dark sacred realm more than 100 eras earlier. Although many cultivators initially challenged it, repeated defeats gradually drove them away until only about 1,000 remained nearby. Those watching became excited when Luo Feng entered the battle. They witnessed him severely injure the primordial prisoner with a single palm before completely suppressing it in direct combat. As they watched the Blood Sea array continuously weaken the lava prisoner, they compared Luo Feng with previous invincible cultivators. Dragon 9 Taoist Monarch had once required more than 10,000 cultivators in a combined formation and still failed to threaten the prisoner. Even scattered attacks from more than 100,000 cultivators had accomplished nothing. Yet Luo Feng alone completely suppressed the primordial prisoner. They concluded that no recorded invincible cultivator in the history of the dark sacred realm had ever demonstrated such overwhelming power. They discussed the two traditional paths to invincibility: projecting spiritual will beyond the braided cage and fully developing a world-level primordial bloodline. They did not realize that Luo Feng followed an entirely different fusion Dao path. Instead of pursuing perfect balance between life and death, he focused on the Star Tower blood scale and pushed the limits of lifeform size to the extreme. Although this path was much more difficult, it granted far greater power. As the lava prisoner continued sinking deeper into the Blood Sea, its resistance weakened until it saw a gigantic pill furnace emerge with its lid already open. Realizing disaster was unavoidable, it could no longer resist. Wrapped by the Blood Sea array, it was dragged directly into the furnace before the lid instantly sealed shut. Among all of Luo Feng's life and death secret treasures, this furnace possessed the greatest ability to refine enemies. The Blood Sea gradually became calm again as Luo Feng sat cross-legged above it, controlling the deep green furnace whose surface glowed with intertwining green and black secret patterns. Inside, the lava prisoner was continuously refined. It regretted concealing part of its strength because the Blood Sea array had prevented it from using its hidden power before it was imprisoned within the furnace. Watching from above, Yifei frowned and instructed Chu Zhe to loosen the lava prisoner's seal again because it still posed no meaningful threat to Luo Feng. Chu Zhe warned that releasing additional strength could allow primordial pollution to emerge. Yifei responded that as long as the prisoner's soul remained completely sealed, slight power pollution would have only a minimal effect. Chu Zhe agreed and carefully relaxed the restraints further with his command token. This time, the release crossed an important threshold, allowing the lava prisoner to access a tiny portion of its true high-level primordial essence. Although only a trace of its original strength was restored, It still possessed genuine high-level primordial power capable of polluting divine emperors. While Luo Feng sat above the blood sea controlling the life and death pill furnace, he suddenly sensed that the lava prisoner's struggle inside the furnace had become dramatically stronger. Luo Feng was shocked when the lava prisoner suddenly generated an overwhelming resisting force inside the pill furnace. Although Luo Feng used all his strength to suppress it, the resistance increased dramatically within only a few breaths until the furnace lid was blasted open. The lava prisoner emerged with a slightly smaller body covered in golden flames that made even Luo Feng sense the threat of death. The lava prisoner declared that it would reveal the true power of a high-level primordial life and immediately charged toward Luo Feng. Luo Feng summoned a grayish-green spear containing the mysteries of life and death and thrust it forward. The lava prisoner answered with a single punch carrying the force to destroy heaven and earth. The impact traveled through the spear, causing Luo Feng's body to shake violently. His hand holding the spear disintegrated into dust, and his arm was shattered in multiple places despite the protection of his secret treasure. Luo Feng immediately realized that the lava prisoner's previous strength had been completely sealed and that it had only been using clumsy force. Now it was displaying only a trace of the true power of a high-level primordial life. Yet even this tiny portion possessed a fundamentally different quality. Luo Feng understood that everything below the level of high-level primordial life would be destroyed before such power. Luo Feng transformed his body into the endless blood sea and fully activated the blood sea formation. The lava prisoner, wrapped in blazing golden flames like a miniature sun, plunged into the blood sea. The seawater was continuously burned away and erased despite the enhancement of the undying heart and the support of the enormous formation. Luo Feng felt as though an immense icy continent was facing an endlessly burning miniature sun whose energy could never be exhausted. He realized there was no practical way to fight directly. Even with secret treasures, a few more exchanges would tear his body apart. While the endless blood sea formation could only delay the inevitable as it was constantly consumed by the flames. Although he could escape by dividing the blood sea into countless avatars and fleeing through spatial rifts, Luo Feng rejected retreat. He believed that after reaching his current cultivation level, only such a powerful opponent could help him achieve further breakthroughs. Even if this avatar were completely destroyed together with more than 10 life and death secret treasures, his avatar inside the great primordial hall could recover countless times. Compared to comprehending the half-primordial life and death Tao, such losses were insignificant. Filled with fighting spirit, Luo Feng continued launching massive waves, dragons, and chains from the endless blood sea to attack. The lava prisoner laughed as every attack was effortlessly burned away by the golden flames. Thin layers of golden fire spread across the blood sea, continuously destroying large amounts of blood sea power. Instead of weakening, the flames absorbed the destroyed blood sea power as nourishment. Because of the seals, the lava prisoner could only use a tiny trace of its original high-level primordial power. Yet even that was enough. It declared that the difference between high-level primordial life and cultivators trapped inside the braided cage was absolute and that Luo Feng's large body merely required more time to destroy. Luo Feng discovered that his undying blood sea body had only suffered a small amount of direct destruction. But a much larger portion had already been contaminated by the high-level primordial power. The contaminated regions could no longer be controlled normally, greatly reducing the performance of his body. Watching from above, Chu Zhe worried that allowing the primordial prisoner to use even a trace of high-level primordial power might have gone too far because Luo Feng could not resist it. Yi Feiyu replied that without this trace of power, the primordial prisoner would have been completely unable to challenge Luo Feng, whose strength within the braided cage had already reached an astonishing level. They agreed that their decision was correct because only high-level primordial power could truly threaten him. Even if Luo Feng failed, they could easily remove the contamination afterward. They had deliberately sealed the prisoner's soul, life core, and every other dangerous ability, releasing only a tiny amount of its fundamental power because soul contamination would have been impossible for them to resolve. The more than 1,000 observing cultivators were astonished to see that the primordial prisoner could now fly at incredible speed, making it far more dangerous than before. They hoped Luo Feng could still kill it and immediately spread the news. Many powerful cultivators, including Dragon 9 Taoist Monarch and Divine Emperor GK, began traveling toward the battlefield, although they would need time to arrive. Eventually the endless blood sea stopped attacking and became calm. The lava prisoner mocked Luo Feng for giving up while hovering above the sea. Deep beneath the surface, Luo Feng sat cross-legged and ignored his opponent. He observed that only a small percentage of his body had been directly destroyed. But contamination had already spread through more than half of it. The polluted regions resisted his control, greatly weakening his ability to command his remaining body. Continuing to attack had become meaningless because the contamination was increasing rapidly. This avatar possessed an enormous energy reserve together with numerous life and death secret treasures. Yet even a trace of high-level primordial power was enough to pollute it so extensively within the braided cage. Luo Feng remembered that a newly advanced high-level primordial life without any restrictions could cause even greater contamination capable of corrupting soul consciousness itself. However, once spiritual will leapt beyond the braided cage, it could suppress and expel such contamination. He recalled that Yuan Shang Palace Master had once encountered such a newly advanced high-level primordial life and even suffered soul contamination. Compared with that, this was only contamination from a trace of high-level primordial power. Luo Feng concentrated all his spiritual power on suppressing and expelling it. As the golden flames continued burning away his life power while contamination spread, Luo Feng sensed a subtle transformation inside his entire mind-consciousness system. Every life unit within his enormous body possessed its own spiritual nature and instinct. Under the simultaneous threats of destruction and contamination, the survival instinct of every life unit became dominant, allowing them to unite more perfectly than ever before. This produced a slight but crucial change in the operation of the mind-consciousness system. Luo Feng immediately grasped this elusive inspiration that he had long been seeking. Having experienced this state once, he could permanently remember the mysterious and extremely complex method by which the mind-consciousness system operated. Luo Feng deliberately reproduced this new operational method. As soon as he did, every life unit throughout the endless blood sea unified far more efficiently. The enormous network of consciousness expanded continuously, with each consciousness thread becoming incomparably stronger until the complete mind consciousness reached an unprecedented level. At that moment, Luo Feng's spiritual will broke through the final barrier of the braided cage and leapt beyond it. Achieving complete freedom, his transcendent spiritual will instantly enveloped his entire body, granting perfect control over every part of it. The contamination from the golden flames was immediately expelled without leaving a single trace. Luo Feng was filled with boundless joy. The perfected mind-consciousness system completely governed the vast blood sea body, while the spiritual will beyond the braided cage controlled it effortlessly with almost no expenditure of spiritual power. He felt capable of simultaneously using many secret treasures while still performing the most refined techniques. Luo Feng realized that his life and death Tao beneath the braided cage had finally reached complete perfection.